This was a fun little scene I put together in Blender the other day. A couple different options with some different color correction. It felt honestly more like I was compositing than I was actually creating a Blender 3D scene. But let's hop into Blender here and I'll show you how it was all created. So a lot of it was just created using image textures. And so, for example, I'm going to create the floor here and it'll be something like that. And it was created just using an image texture. So we'll call this one our desert. And we'll go ahead and add an image texture. A lot of the textures were created using Midjourney. So I went ahead and added that texture. You can see it's pretty big right now, but it is tiled. And what that allows us to do is we can go ahead and add a value here to the scale and just bump that number up quite a bit. And there are some grid lines that you can kind of see once they get big enough, but because we're actually only seeing this from the side view, you can't really tell. So it's not that big of a deal in this scenario, but I'll basically turn that up, I don't know, 8 or 9, something like that. And then what I did was I went ahead into edit mode, subdivided it a bunch of times, and turned on proportional editing. And I just grabbed a few different points here to add a little bit of depth to it, so it's not just one big flat plane. Something like that to add a little bit of waviness, and there's always going to be some correction in the future, so we'll just leave it at that for now. And I kind of like it. What you can also do is something like going into the modifiers and generating an array, and so technically just create a bunch of these, say like 3 or 4 of them on front to back, and then adding another one. So a second array, and then this time it's going to be on the Y. So like that, and then I really don't need any more than 3 of them. And that just makes it a whole lot bigger. And at this point, I'll get the camera settings all set up. I think it was at a 35 millimeter, if I remember correctly. Looks about right. Now, I'm going to go ahead and add the lighting. I don't always start with the lighting, but I think in this case it might be called for, just so I can get that set up. So the lighting was just a simple HDRI from hdrihaven.com or Polyhaven or whatever that's called now. And then, so you can see some cracks here, and then that's happening because of the array. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and tweak that so that's not happening. So I'm in edit mode, and then I'm going to go over here, and I'm just going to kind of fix up these edges a little bit. I'm not even sure. I don't even think I actually used the array in the final clip that I showed, but if I were to go back, I might actually use the array to make it look a little bit bigger. Something like that should work for now. And then I think I also, so what I think I did was I duplicated this, and I'm going to just leave it here for now. And I'm going to get rid of the array because I don't really need that. And then I took this one, and this right here is why I kind of felt like I was compositing more than I felt like I was creating like a 3D scene in a 3D world. Because you could really do something like this in just After Effects. It's really just like layering things up and creating depth kind of artificially. And so I'm going to go ahead and scale these up. Alternatively, you know what I'm actually going to do? I'm going to go ahead and add a landscape, and I'm just going to do it this way because this is going to create a little bit more detail. And I'm going to scale it up, and then I'm just going to use this landscape a few different times. And so scale it down a little bit, and then maybe crunch it in a little bit because we don't really need to see that depth. And then I'm just going to use it a few times, maybe rotate it so it's not the same thing over and over again. And then grab both of them, duplicate, move around, and then I can also do some proportional editing just to make sure that they're not like repeating and it doesn't look obvious that they're repeating. So go ahead and do something like that, and that should be about good for now. And then those can also take on the texture of the desert. So I'm going to grab all of them and then go to Object, Materials, and then link them. And now they should all have that same exact material, which they do. I'm going to go ahead and add the background here, which was, again, just another image texture. And this was also created in Midjourney, so I'm just going to line it up back here. And I'm going to put it very far away from the camera so that there will be a little bit of a parallax, but for the most part, it will just pretty much be the same sky as the camera animates across the scene here. So I'm going to put it way back, and there are probably going to be some mountains in between the desert and the sky picture. So I'm going to put it a little bit bigger than the camera scene itself, and put it just so it's above that landscape, like so. And then I can go ahead and I could create some new ones, or I could just grab these landscape textures and move them back. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set them at different depths here. So I'm going to leave one of these right here, like that. I'm going to move this one back here, maybe rotate it a bit, and then move this one back here, make it a lot bigger. And I'll have to move these around in the camera view to see where we're at, but something like that. And so, okay, so they're a bit high right now. And then I think I also have a mountain texture that I can give them. And then I'm going to make one more really big mountain in the background. And so, like so. Yeah, like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and give them the mountain texture. Okay, so it's got the mountain texture. I'm going to get rid of this scale here because we don't need it. And let's see here. How do we want to do this? Let's try a cube projection, and then let's go to the UV editor and see what we're looking at here. We could just project from view, actually. Let's try to just project from view. I'm going to get down low here. This doesn't have to be perfect because it's so far away from the camera. So let's project from view, scale up on the y-axis, and then I'm just going to line this up a little bit better here. And we already got proportional editing on, so I'm going to make it a little flatter on the bottom and something like that. Cool. And now I can do that exact same thing with these. Okay, cool. I am going to add some fog or mist or atmosphere, so that will be added later on. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of animation, and then let's get the car in here. So let's bring up a timeline and let's animate this camera out. So let's bring this over here a little bit, and then let's go like 120, and let's bring it way over here. And let's see how we're looking. And let's get rid of the Bezier, however you say it. And I think we're looking pretty good. It's going a little bit slow, so maybe we could bring this to like 100. I think the final one was like 120. So maybe we'll move it back to 120 and then just move this one back a little bit. Like so. Cool. So now let's play it and see how we're looking. Yeah, we're looking pretty good. There are some cracks in some of these desert landscapes, but that's okay for now. Another thing I noticed is that these mountain landscapes also need to be unwrapped, and so let's just try unwrapping them. And let's do Smart UV Project instead. And let's see how that looks. Looks okay. I might have to switch these textures up a little bit, but let's see here. Smart UV Project, Smart UV. Cool, so let's go ahead and get the car in here. So I really did not want to model a car, and I did not even want to download a car model and have to texture it. And so I cheated a little bit. And what I ended up doing was I went to Midjourney and I generated some images of this Ford, I think it's a Ford Escort, And I basically just plopped these images into After Effects. And then I went ahead and masked them out. So it's not a perfect mask, but I masked out the car, and then I went ahead and masked out the wheels individually. And I took those wheels and I made a center point so that they're in the center, so that when I spin this, it's relatively, well, that's not perfect. Let's see if I can get it center here. But the idea is that so that it can spin like an actual wheel would. So I'm really cheating here a little bit. And again, this is kind of why I felt like I was compositing more than creating a 3D scene, because I really was. And then I brought this one back here. And then what I did was I took the rotation and said time, let's try 60. And that's obviously not enough, so we'll say time negative 6,000. And I want it to spin as fast as a wheel would. There we go, times 6,000. And then this one over here, I'll also rotate it times 6,000, which is basically just giving it an expression to tell it, I want you to rotate 6,000 times. I think that's by the time the animation is done. I could be wrong about that, but that's the basic idea of what you're doing. And that one doesn't want to rotate for some reason. Let's go ahead and copy this one and just bring this one over. So we have some rotating wheels, and I basically exported those out individually and then imported those into Blender, which I'll do in just a bit here. I also got rid of these windows because I don't want the background to be shown here in this image. And then I also added a little bit of an animation to the car here. So you can see when we play, well, you can't see it a whole lot, but if you zoom in, it's pretty subtle, but the car is kind of like shaking a little bit, right? And the wheels are going up and down a little bit. So I added a little bit of wiggle on the wheels. I think I did that. I might have done that to the anchor point, but we'll try it with the position. And then let's go ahead here and add a little bit of wiggle. So I'm going to add a keyframe here and move it back a little bit. Okay, move it back a little bit. And then we'll also add a keyframe right here. And now we can take these keyframes and we can add a little bit of wiggle, which basically just randomizes basically exactly what it sounds like, a wiggle. And basically just play around till you get something that you like. That's not going to be frequent enough, and it's also not going to be enough magnitude. So let's go ahead and say like 15 and 5. And that might be a little bit too much. Yeah, it's about right. And then we can copy those position keyframes and then paste it into this one as well. Oh, no, we can't do that. So we'll just go, and that's why I did it to the anchor point. I thought I did it to the anchor point, but that's okay. We can just go ahead and create some new positions and then apply that. And now we've got a little bit of wiggle. I'm doing this a little bit fast, so it's not perfect. And then the last thing that I did was I added a little bit. This was I thought the most important thing, although it didn't turn out. It was pretty subtle, but I did like how it turned out. And I think what I did was I turned on the 3D layer. So we'll go ahead and turn on the 3D layer, and then we'll add a rotation. And then I think what I did was I added a little bit of wiggle to the orientation. So let me try that, and let's just see how it is. So the wiggle, so again, we're just adding an expression the same way we added the expression to the position, but this time it's not just repeating, it's adding a wiggle, but a repeating wiggle. So we could have just added a wiggle the same way we did it, but this way we're just doing an expression. And yeah, okay, so that looks good. It was too much though, so let's go ahead and do wiggle. 2 is the frequency, so let's go ahead and say like 0.8 and then 2 with comma 2. With rotation, the magnitude, it has to be really low, or else it's going to look not very subtle. And so it's important that we keep that pretty low, and even 2 is too much, so let's go ahead and say like 1. Yeah, that looks about right. So something like that is what I did. I'm not gonna spend a bunch of time here to fix it up, but I am gonna go ahead into Blender here, and I'm gonna import that into my Blender scene as a MP4 or an image sequence. And I got my car here. Let's scale it up a little bit, see if it's working. As you can see, I put the wheels behind the car for my actual animation. Oh, and then the last thing I did, I forgot about this. I also, I got rid of this window here, and I added, I have a Storyblok subscription, and I just found this, this random dude in front of a green screen, and I put him behind the car. And that was basically all I did with that. So we basically got this little animation, and as you can see, the rotation is pretty subtle. The wheels are kind of wiggling up and down a little bit, and then the car is kind of rocking back and forth. So let's go ahead and set it up, and let's bring it back here-ish, maybe a little bit forward. And then what I also did was, you can go, technically you could go as far detailed into this as you want. What I ended up doing was, so I tried to get a little bit, it was pretty tough to get a reflection. I did turn the roughness down, and I think what I also did was I took this sky texture and I went ahead and duplicated it and brought it around in front of the car to see if I could get a little bit of a reflection. It was pretty tough to do so. There is a little bit of reflection. You can't really see. Yeah, it's pretty tough to tell. And then what I did with the windows was I went into edit mode and took the knife tool and I cut out these windows and I gave them their own textures. And so I think you hit enter and then you could technically separate by selection. And now you can move this one around freely. And then I gave this one a new texture. So we'll say a new texture and then a window. And then I gave it its own window texture. So you could use the glass, built-in glass texture, or you could do something else. You could also give this window a little bit of depth if you wanted to. Let's see here. Okay, so it might not work in Eevee, which is the material preview. Yeah, something like that. And then you can give it a little bit of texture if you wanted to. Or sorry, not texture, a little bit of depth. So take this, give it a little bit of depth, and then you could add like a dispersion effect if you wanted to. I think what I also did was I added a little bit of, not warble, Musgrave, I think it's called. Yeah. And then I took the Musgrave, made it a bump, plugged the height into the height, the normal into the normal, and now it just has a little bit of Musgrave. Obviously it's too much here, so I'll bring that way down and then scale it up a little, or scale it down a little bit to make the texture bigger. Something like that. Basically warps the material a little bit. And then you could also do the same thing for the back window and also this front window. So basically you're just taking the knife tool and cutting those out. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Decent. I did a subpar job with this front window. I probably should smoothen that out a little bit. One thing I should mention is that this really only works because there's such low detail in this car and because we're far away. If we were up close, this absolutely would not work. It just simply wouldn't work because there's just not enough detail here. You can see it looks pretty flat once you start getting close. Usually there's depth underneath these windows. Obviously you can see there's this person on the 3D screen. There's no steering wheel, right? But if you're far away, it's really tough to see all that. And so it only works because it's far away, and even that, it's not quite, I wouldn't necessarily call it photorealistic, but I think it gets the job done for the shot that I needed. I think I also added a road here, and so let's go ahead and add the road, and then I also added some cones. So for the road was super simple, same thing that I did with the desert, which was basically just adding this road texture here. And let's see, it might have been a square texture. Let's go ahead and add the image texture. Okay, so there's the road texture. Let's make it nice and flat. Ooh, I almost forgot. I have to parent the windows to the car here. Let me do that quick before I forget. So make sure to parent those. Keep transform. Okay, we're good there. And then we have this road texture. Let's go ahead and line it up. And then let's see here. This one does not have to be perfect either because I'm also going to take the edges and kind of slant them down a little bit. Let's see here. I think what I did was add an array. And so I'm just going to go ahead and add the array. And then that should be good. Nice. Okay. Yep, that should be all good to go. And then I can go ahead and take these edges. And again, I'm doing a lot of cheating because none of this is super close to the camera. And I'm also cheating a little bit because this is after the fact. And this is not necessarily the final scene, but more so just showing the process of how all this was created. Something like so. And I think the camera was actually a little bit further back. Okay, there's some shadow here, which I don't like. I think it's being caused by this. Next, we could add the mist pass. And so let's go ahead and add a cube. Where's the cube? And for this, there are lots of different ways you go. You could go with compositing and adding it via an actual mist. You could do volume, which is what I'm gonna do. You go lots of different ways. So we'll say fog, atmosphere, whatever you want to call it. And then you could do principled volume, or you could do volume scatter. Let's try volume scatter, and we'll see which one looks best. Okay, let's turn the density down to 0.01. Okay, let's go ahead and let me try principled volume. Sometimes they can be a little bit fidgety, and sometimes one works a little bit better than the other. In this case, they're pretty similar. Let's go 0.0. Okay, that looks pretty decent. It's not perfect, but and then you can also scale it way back, so the mountains in the back are going to look almost look like they have haze in front of them. There we go. This will look a lot better. Obviously, it's too much right now, but that was the intention. I really want it to be thicker as it went back, and you can basically just keep turning it down until you get the look that you're going for. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I am also noticing that the car is in shade, which was not the intention, and I think it's because my sky back here is actually getting in the way, and I'm not actually sure that there's much of a reflection being created. So get rid of that, and I think it looks a little bit better now. Sometimes you do all this work on something and you want it to be really big so people can see all the hard work you've put into something, but then it just looks too big and you've kind of ruined the scene. And so I'd say it's really important to be subtle with things like the extra details, but they are super important. So don't spend too little time on them, but don't spend too much time on them. So we'll say cone, and let's go ahead and just use some loop cuts. And we can go ahead and add them that way. So let's go ahead and add an image, or a texture. I'm going to add another one, call this one my orange. We'll assign it there, and then add orange here, and then this one should be a white with a little bit of roughness added to it. Boom, and some roughness added here. Boom, nice. Okay, and actually, I take it back. I lied. Add this one orange, and then let's make this one our white. There we go, okay. And the top looks a little bit funky, but that's okay. Maybe scale it down just a little bit. Cool, so we've got our cone. We can just throw a few cones in here just to add a little bit of construction zone as it passes by. And then here. Nice. We got a few different cones. Let's see here. My animation got a little bit messed up. Now let's go back to frame 1 and let's line that up. And let's go to the end frame and line that up, and now the camera should be following. Pretty good, but there's also, when you turn linear on, okay, perfect. And then we can also add a little bit of animation to the camera. As you can see, I don't have necessarily a perfect process for this. I'm kind of doing a little bit here, a little bit there. I don't do like all modeling, all texturing. I kind of build the scene as it goes and just figure out what needs to be done just based on what I'm seeing. Because every scene you do is different, and I kind of just take it as it goes. So I'm gonna add a little bit of camera movement here. And let's go ahead and turn the scale down, or sorry, scale up, and then the strength down. Way too much here. I find that a little bit of camera movement is good, and a lot of camera movement is way overdone. I think Ian Hubert has done a really good job in bringing camera movement into Blender scenes, but I think people overdo it sometimes, which gives it a very a Blender CG-esque look. So let's see how this looks here. Looks okay. I think even this is a bit too much. I'm really trying to go with subtle. Yeah, that looks okay. Even this was a little bit too much. Let's turn this down to 0.025. And then what I like to do, if you're holding a camera or if a camera is on a gimbal, I think it depends. And also, I think this should be thought about. How is this camera being held if it were in real life? Technically, in this case, it would probably be on a vehicle, and so the vehicle is probably going to go a little bit up and down, and so I'm going to add two different noise modifiers. The first one is going to be the waves of the desert, right? So there's going to be some up and down waves like that, almost as if like the truck that the camera is on is going up and down with the desert. And then the second thing I'm going to add is a noise modifier, almost like some micro jitters. Scale here, turn this way up, sorry, way down, and the strength we're going to turn way down. There we go. Okay. And I want this to be almost unnoticeable. Nice. And this is one thing that you might have to just render out a few times and see how it's looking. It's really tough to tell from here. So the cones are not very high quality, as you can see here, but with the motion blur, and then I'm gonna also zoom it out a little bit more. Hopefully that should help. And so I'm going to now parent the camera. Since I've already done animation, I'm gonna go ahead and parent the camera to an empty, so that when I change the empties location, the camera should not, we shouldn't need to change anything with the animation. So I'm going to go ahead and do this and move it back a little bit. Nice. Okay. And then what I also like to do is I like to turn on render region to see how we're actually looking. And we'll compare it to this scene right here. So a few things that I'm noticing: the haze needs to be tweaked a little bit. Right now there's just a little bit too much. Camera settings need to be tweaked a little bit. We can see some pixels here. So there's some things that we need to fix up. And then also the last thing that I did here was I added grass to this desert scene, because right now this desert scene is very, very flat. And that's okay. You can keep it like that. But I like to add a little bit of grass, so I'll show you what I did there for that. Again, kind of another little cheat. I don't have any grass essentials pack or anything like that. But let's go ahead. This, I think, is going to help things out a lot. Now, I did not build this to scale, which means this f-stop is probably going to be all messed up. Yeah, and we can see it's down to 0.4, which if it was actually 0.4 and a 35 millimeter, it would be very blurry, but because it's built so small, it's kind of all messed up. So let's say 0.25. Yeah, I think that looks a lot better. The car looks very bright, and so maybe I'll go ahead and add a little bit of curves. And the curves I always have a tough time in Blender with. I'm not very good with the curves, and honestly I'm not very good with nodes in general here in Blender, but yeah, that looks like 10 times better, because before it was just too bright. Like the sand was not bright and the car was very bright. So I think that looks a lot better. Okay, so let's render out an image and see how it's looking, and that will tell us how much detail we actually need to give to this sand texture. Okay, I am going to stop this a little early, but I think I like what I'm seeing already. As you can see, the motion blur makes this look already, the pixels you can barely tell. So it doesn't look very pixelated. So let's go ahead and just add some grass to the scene, and we'll see what we're looking after we add that grass. So I'm gonna add a plane, And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a blade of grass. And I don't want this to be too detailed because I'm going to copy this a lot of times. So we'll make that pretty small up top and then make it a little bit wider on the bottom. And I'm going to add just a few loop cuts, not too many, and something like that. And then what I'm going to do is I could add the texture now, or I keep going, and I'm going to keep going. And so I'm going to create another blade of grass. And then I'm going to take both these blades of grass and I'm going to duplicate them and maybe make these a little bit smaller, rotate them a little bit. And then I'm going to take all of these blades of grass, and there's going to be some overlapping, and that's okay because they're going to be pretty clumped together. And then I'm just going to basically keep creating these little clumps, and I'm going to keep duplicating them over and over again. And what's basically going to happen is we're going to have one big giant clump of grass. And so I did have some reference images that I was looking at for this, and so that was super helpful. But let's go ahead and take this here, and I'm just going to bring it up so it's out of view. Missed one. And then I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it and save it just in case I need to go back to it in the future. And then I'm going to join all of the objects together. So now we got one big giant clump of grass. So I'll call this one our clump grass. One more thing, I have to go ahead and add the texture, and it's going to be another image texture, and we've got our grass texture, and it looks pretty flat. So I'm going to smart UV project, and then I also like to add a little bit of I like to add a mix. I like to add a translucent bottom, and then I just plug the color into that. It just adds a little bit of see-through, and there we go. Cool. So we've got our grass, and I'm going to take my landscape here, and I'm going to create a particle system, and it's going to be a hair particle system. Render object, and then we're going to find the grass clump. And now it basically populates a bunch of them. These are pretty close to the camera, so they're going to be a little bit larger. Coordinates are always a little bit difficult to figure out, but once you figure that out, they usually look pretty good. And then let's go advanced rotation, randomize so they don't look like they were populated with a computer. And let's see, 0.04 number, we'll say like 200. Yeah, we'll say 50 because they're pretty dispersed in an actual desert, and that translucent color looks so good with these grass blades. It's really what makes these grass textures pop. We'll say actually even less than that. These are really dispersed in an actual desert. And then I probably should also add a little bit more detail if this was a final render, because right now I think it needs those little strains of grass with the little flowers. I don't know what they're called, but the little budding flowers on top. But this is basically all I did, and then I did the exact same thing down here. Now, unfortunately, like the naming system here is just funky, but basically I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to do the exact same thing, and the sizing's going to be a little different, so I'll just recreate it. Again, we'll say clump grass. I take it back. I have to apply the array modifier, and that way it can populate across the entire thing. And already it's looking great. We'll say advanced rotation, randomize. You can randomize the phase. If you can add a little bit of phase, you can randomize the phase. Let's see, what did we do here? Object rotation. I think that's what we did. Do here. There we go. That looks better. And that's good. And again, these are just, there's too many of them. So we'll say 200. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to bring this mountain down a little bit, and then I'm also going to bring the desert plain up a little bit. You know what? No, let's bring the mountain down a little bit. They're being cut off on the edge over here. Okay, and that looks pretty good as it is. And basically what I do is I render these out I'll probably render out a few of these and just kind of tweak it up as it goes and just see like what needs to be fixed, what color needs to be fixed. Does this color need to be brought down a little bit? Or is it too bright? And then I come look at it a day later and say, oh, there's like 15 things wrong with it, so I need to fix those up. I'm gonna go ahead and render it out and we'll see how we're looking. So right now it's just finishing out the rendering. I'm gonna stop right here because I think all the basics are done, and now it's really just tweaking and getting it to 100%, which in all honesty, it does take a while to take it from 75%, which I think is what we're at. We're at like 65, 75%, and getting it to 100%. Even this one right here probably is not at 100%, but I think we got pretty close to where we're at right here. So I'm going to stop right here. If you like this, let me know. Other than that, we'll catch you in the next one. See you guys.